It's just that when you have a number 2 album to someone who's selling shirts and merch and selling passes for a tour that's not even announced yet, it feels like you're being tricked. It feels like, someone is playing a game and like beating you at a game as opposed to just selling music.
On August 10th, 2018, Nicki Minaj would release her highly anticipated 4th studio album, Queen.
Hey yo, look like I'm going for
it had been 4 years since her last record, and just because of that, there was a lot of hype within the Nicki Minaj fan base. And as always, the bars were ready to go all in support for Nicki Minaj. The album isn't necessarily a conceptual record or anything, so it's very welcoming in that sense.
Dreams of fucking one of these little rappers. I'm just playing.
It's really all about re-establishing Nicki Minaj as the queen of hip-hop, or at least in theory, because there was a lot of mixed reviews for this album, but for a lot of people, Queen felt like a dragged out record, and though it can be really good at times, I wouldn't say any of the songs on Queen would be near the top of a Nicki Minaj top 10 list.
With no chaser, pretty titties all up in his face, sir.
And in a way, it kind of felt like hip-hop moved past Nicki Minaj. Because even though that a 4-year gap isn't unusual in music, especially when you're in the pop charts and have a fan base like Nicki does, the difference in this case is that hip-hop changed a lot over those 4 years, especially as it related to women in hip-hop. Because while Nicki was away, hip-hop found a replacement. Cardi B's rise through the ranks of hip-hop was historic for many reasons. But for Nicki, it meant that for the first time in her career, there was a real competitor.
Nah, I like dollars, I like diamonds, I like stunning, I like shining.
And it wasn't just me saying it, that's what a lot of people felt in a world post Bodak Yellow. Eventually, you kinda knew that these two would have to beef. And it didn't help that Cardi B was accomplishing things that Nicki Minaj hadn't done in her career. Because by the end of 2018, Cardi B would have topped the top 100 charts 3 times. And the hits were legit, as Cardi B would break the record for longest standing #1 hit by a female rapper previously belonging to Lauryn Hill. In contrast to Cardi B, however, Nicki Minaj had never reached the top of the charts. In many ways, it seemed like Cardi B was surpassing Nicki Minaj, and it was up to Nicki Minaj to prove that she was still #1. And for better or worse, that's basically what Queen was. It was basically what Watch the Throne was for Jay-Z and Kanye, a record to re-establish your dominance. And if you're Nicki Minaj, the way to establish dominance is to go #1. But there was one person with a strong fan base standing in the way of that.
For this life I cannot change.
On August 3rd, 2018, Travis Scott would release Astroworld.
We just rock Coachella, I gave her half of the check.
Astroworld didn't have a narrative that people had to follow. It wasn't a conceptual album. It was just vibes. And it wasn't about the bars either. It was a record that was basically a spectacle.
Parked the days in and taking no days in.
There was the big rollout and the hidden guest features and the beat switches. And it felt like everything in this album was created with the mindset of catching everybody's attention. And in doing so, it does a great job with The Weeknd, Juice WRLD, Sway Lee being all a part of this album. To kind of simplify things, Astroworld was basically an event. And in being so, it was one of the biggest events of 2018. It was this record that you couldn't get away from, and a record that you couldn't get from anybody else. And because of that, the album was pretty successful. It's one of the most iconic albums of the past decade, and for sure the most iconic of 2018. Or in other words, just like Queen, Astroworld was built to rack up numbers. But because of their release dates, only one album could be #1. At the end of the tracking week, Billboard had concluded that Travis Scott outsold Nicki Minaj, and although it wasn't too big of a deal, Nicki Minaj was pissed.
Whole nigga of the week, of course, is Travis Scott. Woo! How are you selling something that does not have anything to do with your album, but it's being counted on Billboard as album sales?
Astroworld outselling Nicki Minaj was Nicki's 9/11. And not gonna lie, this was to Nicki Minaj what losing the 2020 elections was to Trump. Cause man, once Nicki got outsold, she began blaming everybody not named Nicki Minaj. From Kylie Jenner to Spotify to a 6-month-old baby. If you wanted an excuse for why Astroworld outsold Nicki, Nicki had those, with her thesis mainly revolving around bundles. For those who don't know, Bundles are a marketing strategy to pad your stats and make sales numbers bigger than they actually are. And throughout the 2010s, everybody did it. But for whatever reason, in this specific instance, Nicki took issue and thus blasted Travis Scott.
But what we not gonna do is have this auto-tune man coming up here selling fucking sweaters and telling y'all he sold 500,000 fucking albums, because he didn't.
Auto-tune man is a hilarious insult, not gonna lie. Maybe Nicki's right, real shit. But the problem with her claims of Travis Scott trying to game the system is that Nicki Minaj did the same thing. Nicki Minaj was also selling sweaters, necklaces, shirts, all in the name of gaming the system, at least going by Nicki Minaj's logic. And on top of that, she was also trying to game the system in other ways.
69 like Takashi, call him papi, worth it.
She added Fifi as a bonus track to the album, which again on paper isn't the biggest deal, but in the context of this specific situation, it just highlights the hypocrisy of Nicki Minaj. Because it wasn't like Fifi was here for artistic reasons. It wasn't even in the original album. It got added in late in the week to pad stats. But honestly, the main reason why people thought that Nicki Minaj came off as a little bit stupid in this situation is because of what happened with DJ Academics. For those who don't know, DJ Academics is a hip-hop journalist, heavy quotation marks on the journalist part, but you know, he's a reporter. And he posted a projection of how many albums Nicki Minaj would sell, and Nicki Minaj replied by saying fake news. Again, this is Nicki Minaj's 2020 election. I am not gonna lie. And you would think based on that Nicki Minaj knew she was gonna sell even more than what was projected. But as it turns out, she somehow sold less. And of course, if you're not meeting the projections of what your album is supposed to sell, you're not beating Travis Scott.
This shit way too formal, y'all know I don't follow suit.
Astroworld would take the #1 spot. And although Nicki Minaj can blame Spotify, Kylie Jenner, Travis Scott's baby, the more objective truth is that more people cared for Travis Scott's Astroworld. It had the bigger singles, which is a big part of what album sales are. And even if you want to blame Spotify for promoting Travis Scott, that's just promotion, dog. Spotify benefits more from promoting a Travis Scott compared to a Nicki Minaj. And that's no hate towards Nicki Minaj. That's just me stating the facts of who is more popular in what demographic. And the reason why I know that is because till this day, Astroworld gets more streams than Queen and it gets more sales than Queen. To put it in perspective, Astroworld is still in Billboard's 200. Nicki Minaj only has one album in that chart, and it isn't Queen. People knew that Nicki Minaj was more or less being a sore loser. And I will say that Nicki Minaj did mess up her public image for a long time with this beef. And well over 5 years later, I gotta say that Nicki Minaj hasn't done anything to recover the public image she once had. She gets into stupid controversies all the time, like that one time she had like a fucking stupid ass rant about a vaccine. Low-key, Nicki Minaj might just be Trump for real, I am not gonna lie. But in conclusion, yeah, Astroworld is a good album, and it was always more relevant than Queen was ever gonna be. Anyways, I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this video, so I'm sorry to whoever I'm offending. I like Nicki Minaj, but you know, people fuck up sometimes. Anyways, with that being said, shout out to Jay Dilla, shout out to me, shout out to y'all.